He is the only president who was an actor in the history of the United States. He was in power for 8 years and let the Soviet Union disintegrate without starting a war. Who is this he? How did he destroy the Soviet Union? How clever is his method? In this video, let's talk about how US President Reagan defeated the Soviet Union by manipulating oil. Okay, let's get started. As we all know, when it comes to the most important thing that the US president wanted to do during the Cold War was, without a doubt, to bring down the Soviet Union. In 1947, the Iron Curtain speech was published, and a Cold War that lasted for 50 years officially kicked off. It is not easy to overthrow the Soviet Union. After World War II, the Soviet Union has the ability to wrestle with the United States, both militarily and economically. However, this stalemate is destined not to last too long. Since President Reagan came to power in 1981, this wonderful balance has gradually begun to be broken. What was Reagan's special skill that enabled him to accomplish his predecessors' long overdue tasks quickly? In my opinion, the main reason is that Reagan accurately and quickly strangled the lifeblood of the Soviet economy. During Brezhnev's administration, the military power of the Soviet Union reached its peak and surpassed the United States to become the world's #1 military power at that time. However, turmoil within the Soviet Union was also revealed at this time. The economic level of the Soviet Union has always been stagnant due to the excessive military focus. And Reagan has noticed this phenomenon. Just 2 days after taking office, Reagan summoned William Casey, then director of the CIA. As his most trusted partner, Reagan gave Casey and his CIA greater power to strengthen intelligence collection on the Soviet Union. Only 1 year later, this huge intelligence network took the entire situation of the Soviet Union into its hands. In May 1982, Reagan signed an 8-page document, and what these documents indicated was to turn from passive to active and begin to intervene in the economic problems of the Soviet Union. It was these policies that eventually led to the disintegration of the Soviet Union. After the 1970s, the world's industrialization level entered a new high. As an important industrial raw material, the price of oil has also soared all the way. At this time, the Soviet Union earned a lot of foreign exchange by relying on oil. But since the Soviet Union entered the post-Stalin era, the industry has been unable to do what it wants. The profit was just a windfall that temporarily covered the Soviet Union's domestic economic problems. Although the Soviet Union was making money crazily by exporting oil at that time, the practical difficulties were not fundamentally resolved. The outbreak of the oil crisis in the Middle East, the world's largest oil-exporting region, sent crude oil prices soaring, triggering massive inflation. At such a critical juncture, many Western countries decided to take a gamble on comprehensive reform. So, what is the decision that allows them to escape the pressure of the Soviet Union? How did the Soviet Union respond at this time? To everyone's surprise, just as the West was making drastic reforms, the Soviet Union was immersed in a dream. To everyone's surprise, just as the West was making sweeping reforms, the Soviet Union was immersed in a beautiful dream. The Western countries realized that the traditional energy-consuming industrial model could be supported for a short time, but it would not be affordable for a long time. So a new industrial revolution began, and traditional industries were constantly replaced by environmental protection industries. After more than 10 years, the productivity of Western countries has made a qualitative leap. Not only has the transformation been successfully completed, but also the problem of oil prices that has plagued them for many years has been solved. On the contrary, the Soviet Union has seen more and more problems. Since the machinery and equipment were left in the early 1930s, after more than 40 years, it was long overdue for obsolescence. At this time, the Soviet Union made a wrong decision and did not replace the new equipment in time. The old equipment was energy-intensive and inefficient, but this problem was also ignored due to the considerable oil production in the Caucasus, which set the stage for future problems. Having missed this wave of reforms, by the 1980s the problems of the Soviet Union became further evident and the country entered years of internal and external problems. At the end of 1982, with the death of Brezhnev, a sign of the era of the Soviet Union ended, and with it, the false prosperity ended. The turbulent Soviet Union at this time was in stark contrast to the United States and the West. What the United States needs to do at this time is to completely cut off the lifeline of the Soviet Union's oil business. At that time, the Middle East was in war, and Saudi Arabia was very worried about its national security. They urgently needed a batch of weapons to strengthen their national defense forces. At this time, the United States handed them a lucrative contract. I will export and assist you with the most advanced weapons, and you must explore oil on a larger scale. Saudi Arabia has no reason to reject the contract. In order to regain the lost oil market and at the same time protect itself from the invasion of foreign enemies, Saudi Arabia signed the contract without thinking twice. So far, the United States and Saudi Arabia have become close, and Saudi Arabia has kept its promise to increase oil production in order to suppress international oil prices. In the second half of 1985 alone, Saudi Arabia's oil production soared from 2 million barrels per day to 9 million barrels, which brought about a cliff-like drop in oil prices. The price per barrel fell from $35 to $12, and the lowest was less than $8. Petroleum at such a price is even cheaper than cola of the same specification. For a while, European countries imported oil from Saudi Arabia one after another, while the high-priced oil from the Soviet Union was ignored. These U.S. measures burst all the bubbles of Soviet illusions. Tens of billions of dollars of assets in the Soviet Union disappeared overnight, which undoubtedly made the already depressed economy worse. The United States finally waited for the right time, and at this time, it once again dealt a fatal blow to the Soviet Union. In order to compensate for the loss of the sharp drop in Saudi oil prices, the United States decided to devalue the US dollar by 25%, but informed Saudi Arabia of this news in advance. Therefore, Saudi Arabia sold all the US dollars in its hands and made a profit of $20 billion US dollars. At this time, the large amount of dollars hoarded by the Soviet Union by selling oil lost a quarter of its value for a while. But at this time, the Soviet Union was still struggling. In order to maintain the previous level, it purchased machinery and equipment from the West, and at the same time, maintained military expenditures for the invasion of Afghanistan. As a result, the Soviet Union had to borrow money from all over the world and became heavily indebted for a while. At that time, the Soviet Union even called on all its citizens to repay the debt together. However, even if the entire Soviet people are used as labor force, the Soviet Union will not be able to pay off the huge foreign debt of up to $120 billion US dollars for a long period of time. Of course, there are many reasons for the disintegration of the Soviet Union. But in my opinion, the economic problems reflected by oil are more prominent. In this way, Reagan has put an end to his most formidable opponent without much effort. Thanks for listening. See you next time.